When the bullet tore through my chest, I didn't scream. I'd learned long ago that silence was safer, but when I heard my stepfather's voice through the radio, steady, almost gentle, say, "You never learned how to follow orders. Augusta Fairchild." Something inside me shattered. He hadn't just tried to kill me that night. He'd been aiming for my obedience my whole life, and for the first time, I decided not to obey. The forest was nothing but fog and headlights. My tires hissed over wet asphalt, the smell of pine thick in the air. Static flickered through the radio, soft, persistent, until it drowned out everything else. I turned the volume down, craving silence, when my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Evan Marks. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. That name hadn't crossed my screen in 20 years. My hand hesitated before answering, pulse hammering in my throat. "It's been a long time, Gus," he said, his voice low and calm. "You still drive alone at night?" I gripped the wheel harder, my knuckles white. "What do you want, Evan?" He chuckled softly, the sound scraping against old memories. "Just wanted to know if my little soldier still remembers how to follow orders." The words hit harder than the cold air seeping through the cracked window. Before I could hang up, a thin red beam swept across my steering wheel, steady, unblinking. Then came the gunshot. Glass exploded. The world tilted. Metal screamed as my car spun off the road, plunging into the ditch below. My shoulder burned, something hot and sharp tearing through flesh. Smoke filled the cabin, gasoline, blood. The radio crackled again, whispering back the only thing I could manage to say before everything went black. "This wasn't random," I breathed, tasting iron. "He sent someone." And then there was nothing, only silence, and the faint echo of his voice, reminding me that monsters don't always stay buried in childhood. I still dream about that house on the hill, where everything had to stay in perfect order. After my father's funeral, Evan Marks arrived in his pressed uniform and promised my mother, "You'll never have to worry again. I'll make this home disciplined." He turned the house into a barracks. 6A, Mom. The whistle. 7, breakfast in silence. 8, inspection. Once, I left a book on the table. He slammed it shut so hard the plates rattled. "Orders first, learning later," my mother whispered. "He means well, Gus." But her hands were shaking. When I asked about my father, Evan said flatly, "There's no room for ghosts in my command." From then on, I learned not to ask. At night, I wrote 3 words in a notebook I hid under my pillow. "I will leave." Years later, I learned he used my father's insurance money to start Mark's Tactical Solutions, calling it a tribute. One night, he made me stand at attention before my father's photo, then threw it to the floor. "A soldier doesn't mourn, she obeys." Blood ran from my nose. He smiled. That was the day fear learned my name. I wrote my mother every month after I left, but no letter ever came back. I thought she was angry. Years later, returning to the empty house, I found a stack of my own letters hidden under the floor, each sealed, each stamped, each marked in red ink. Selfish. I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just stolen my voice. He'd cut the line between us. My mother never stopped waiting, but Evan told her I wanted nothing to do with her. He didn't kill my father. He just made sure I lost both of them. When I walked out, the floor creaked beneath me, soft and hollow, like a heartbeat buried alive. He didn't erase my letters. He erased me. After 8 weeks, I returned to the base as if it were neutral ground, but the room smelled like memory. The auditorium lights washed over faces I'd known my whole career. Applause rose the moment the MC called his name. Evan stepped onto the stage in a gray suit, ribbon on his lapel, and the room treated him like salvation. "True discipline isn't about fear, it's about structure," he said, and the words landed like a sentence. I left before the standing ovation ended, the cheer hollow in my ears. That evening, I drove to my mother's small house in Wilmington. A brass plaque by the door read Mark's Tactical Accounting. Her smile was thin, Her hands trembled over a teacup. "People trust him," she whispered, when I asked why he was still here. The photo of my father was gone. In its place hung Evan's uniformed portrait, with the stitched motto, "Discipline brings peace." I felt the room shrink. Later, an anonymous email arrived in my work inbox. "Welcome home, little soldier. Try not to dig too deep." The sender, unknown, Mark's Tactical, calm. It read like a warning. I realized the line between my past and my present had been braided by his reach. Into my mother, into the base, into the life I thought I'd built. I started pulling records in the dark archive, heart pounding so loud it drowned the hum of the servers. There it was, a transfer dated June 2nd, $9,800. Training support fee, routed from my mother's account to a shell linked to Mark's Tactical. The beneficiary name cut through me. Clint Barker, Retton Sniper. The date matched the week before I was shot. My mother's eyes filled with the old, practiced fear when I showed her the printout. "He said it was for equipment," she murmured. "Please don't make him angry." I rifled through a dusty box labeled Field Contracts and found a faded photo, Evan with a ring of men, caps embroidered with Fort Liberty's insignia. Barker was in the back, jaw set, face I'd seen once in a hospital after the shooting. When I exported the files, the monitor blinked and a blue warning flashed. Unauthorized access. Logged by E.M. He knew I was looking. He always knew. I stayed at the base long after everyone left, the hum of the servers louder than my thoughts. When my phone lit up on the desk, the message was short, surgical. "You should have stayed off my radar." 10 seconds later, it vanished. No number, no history, no trace. Sleep never came that night. By morning, I was standing inside the FBI field office at Fort Liberty, clutching my phone like a piece of evidence that no longer existed. They listened, nodded, filed a report for federal employee threat, and the room went quiet when I said his name. Evan Marks. One agent cleared his throat and said softly, "He's got powerful friends. Ma'am, be careful not to make this political." That was when I realized Evan didn't just control a family, he'd built himself a network. I called the only person I still trusted. Lila Crow had the same clipped tone she used overseas. "You don't need permission to find the truth," she said. "You just need proof." She handed me a black flash drive. "Plug this in. It tracks deleted signals." When I did, the result hit harder than any gunshot. The vanished text had come from the internal server of Mark's Tactical Solutions. He'd used government equipment to send it. Lila dug deeper. "He still has contractor credentials," she muttered. "Level 3 military clearance." Then she froze, eyes narrowing. A file blinked open. "Sniper Sim XE." The last login line read, "User E. Marks, CO207, A.M., June 9th. That was the exact minute the bullet tore through me. Evan hadn't just ordered it, he'd watched it happen. The thought left a chill under my skin that no uniform could hide. He called 2 days later, voice calm, almost kind. "Your mother misses you. Let's not make this ugly." I agreed to dinner, not for peace, but to see the man who thought fear was still my leash. The house looked the same. The warm light, the polished table, the smell of old wood polish trying too hard to mimic comfort. My mother smiled like someone bracing for recoil. Evan poured wine and asked, "Do you still check every mirror before sleeping?" He remembered every habit he'd trained into me, every surveillance pattern disguised as concern. When he lifted his glass, the reflection from his watch painted a thin red dot across my neck. My pulse jumped before I could stop it. He noticed. "Still afraid of light, little soldier?" I met his eyes. "Only when it comes from you." The silence that followed felt heavier than the years we'd lost. The clock ticked like a countdown. As I stood to leave, I bent slightly, sliding a recorder under the table's edge. Behind me, his voice came quiet, almost to himself. "Sometimes you have to teach discipline the hard way." I walked out without looking back. Hours later, Lila's call woke me. Her voice was sharp, breathless. You need to see this. The footage flickered on my screen. Grainy streetlight footage from the night I was shot. Evan's car, headlights off, idling near the tree line at 2:03 a.m. He hadn't just hired someone. He'd been there, watching. The rain had followed me across 3 states, steady and cold like a warning I couldn't outrun. Kansas stretched out endless and gray, the kind of place where time itself felt tired. Lila had traced the name Clint Barker to a small town outside Topeka. I drove there alone. The bar was half empty, lights dimmed to hide what the whiskey couldn't. A jukebox hummed a country song no one listened to. In the corner sat a man with gray hair and a limp, one hand trembling over his glass. I walked toward him, heart steady, recorder hidden in my pocket. You aimed at my heart that night. He looked up slowly, as if deciding whether I was real. I was told it wasn't to kill, he said after a moment. Just to scare. I didn't blink. Who told you that? He sighed, stared into his drink. He said, she needs to remember who's in charge. So I aimed high. And if I had died? Barker's jaw tightened. He said it'd be your fault for not learning discipline. The words hit harder than I expected, because once I believed the same lie. I left a photograph on the bar before I turned to go, my father in his flight suit, smiling at a world that hadn't broken yet. Barker stared at it for a long time. Your father fought for freedom, he murmured. I fought for orders. Maybe that's why men like Marx win. When I reached the door, his voice stopped me. He tossed me a small memory card, his hand shaking. Dash cam. Recorded the handoff. Do what you need to. Shane, outside. The rain came down harder, washing the dust from my shoes, but not the weight from my chest. In the motel room later, I watched the footage. Evan passing Barker a stack of bills, his voice clear even through the static. Just close enough to make her remember discipline. The timestamp burned into the corner of the screen. 02:08 a.m. June 9th. The exact minute the bullet tore through me. He hadn't tried to kill me. He'd tried to finish his lesson. He thought fear was discipline. He never learned that courage is silence that refuses to obey. 3 weeks later, the ballroom at the Carolina Veterans Conference Center glowed gold and immaculate, a cathedral of polished glass and good intentions. Banners read Mentor of the Year, honoring excellence in leadership. Evan Marx's name shimmered on every program, his photograph grinning from each digital display. I stood at the back of the room, a dark silhouette against the glittering crowd. The air smelled of champagne, starch, and self-congratulation. Men in medals shook hands, their wives whispered over dessert. No one saw the tremor running beneath my stillness. Beside me, Lila adjusted the comms earpiece under her hair. Foster waited 2 rows ahead, arms folded, jaw tight. We'd rehearsed this a dozen times, but nothing could steady the weight of what was about to happen. The lights dimmed. The host's voice rang out, proud and rehearsed. Tonight, we honor a man who has redefined mentorship, service, and the American spirit, Mr. Evan Marx. Applause erupted like gunfire. Evan took the stage with practiced grace, every step controlled, every smile calculated. He paused before the microphone, scanning the crowd as if basking in his own creation. Leadership isn't about control, he began, voice rich and steady. It's about family. A polite murmur of approval followed. I moved slowly down the aisle, hands loose at my sides. He continued, preaching the same sermon he'd always used to hide his cruelty. Because family, he said, smiling, teaches discipline through love. That was my cue. The giant screen behind him flickered, light shifting from gold to gray. For a split second, the audience thought it was part of the presentation, until the image sharpened. A parking lot. Headlights cutting through the dark. 2 men standing near a car. Evan's voice came through the speakers, cold and unmistakable. Just close enough to make her remember discipline. The room fell silent. The applause died mid-motion. Evan turned, his expression cracking as the footage played again. The envelope of cash visible in his hand, the date stamp glowing in the corner. June 9th, 0201 a.m. Every camera in the hall was pointed at him now. Foster stood, his badge glinting under the lights. Two federal agents moved through the crowd, quiet but deliberate. Evan spun back toward the microphone, voice breaking. "She's lying! This is fake! She's unstable!" I stepped forward. The click of my heels the only sound in the room. I stopped beside the stage and looked straight into the lens of the main broadcast camera. "Family doesn't hire a sniper," I said, voice calm, steady. "They hide behind medals and call it love." He lunged toward the mic, but Foster's hand was already on his shoulder. "No, Evan," I said softly. "I just stopped obeying." He struggled, shouting something about loyalty, about betrayal, about how I owed him everything. But no one was listening. The applause that followed wasn't for him. It was for the truth. As the agents cuffed him, a red strobe from the police lights outside washed through the windows, cutting across his wrists. For a second, it looked like the laser sight that had once marked my chest. Only now, it illuminated his. He tried to twist away from it, but there was nowhere left to hide. From the stage wings, I saw Lila glance at her laptop. Evan had tried to trigger a remote deletion, but she smiled, whispering into the comms. "All 3 backups confirmed. Broadcast servers, Pentagon archives, national press." The truth was everywhere. He couldn't erase it anymore. Outside, the rain began, tapping softly against the glass. Cameras flashed as Evan was led through the doors. He didn't look back. Not at me. Not at the crowd that had once adored him. The sound of his shoes echoed off marble like the last beat of a failing heart. When he was gone, I turned back to the stage. The LED screen went black, except for one faint reflection. Mine. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the light. "He taught me fear," I said under my breath, barely a whisper. "I taught him consequence." Foster approached quietly, offering a nod that carried more weight than words. Around us, the audience began to rise, not clapping, not cheering, just standing in a silence heavy with recognition. Discipline isn't love, it's a weapon in the wrong hands. And tonight, for once, that weapon was no longer his. The lights dimmed again, and in the dark, I felt something I hadn't in decades. Not victory, not revenge, but release. The kind that only comes when truth finally stands taller than the man who tried to bury it. 8 months later, the world had gone quiet again, this time in the right way. I handed in my resignation, folded the uniform that once defined me, and left the base without ceremony. There was no anger left, only the strange stillness that follows when the noise finally ends. A letter from my mother waited in the mailbox of the small apartment I was renting in Port Townsend. Her handwriting trembled across the page. "I was silent for too long. I thought silence kept us safe. I was wrong." I read it once, then struck a match. The paper curled in on itself, the ink turning to smoke before drifting through the open window. I didn't burn it out of hate. It was cleansing, not destruction. Some ghosts deserve light only once before they fade. Now my days start with the sound of the tide. The house I rent sits on a bluff overlooking the ocean, with an old wooden porch that creaks when the wind moves through it. That's where I teach my survival class, Project Compass, a handful of women, all veterans, all learning how to breathe again. Leah, one of the newer ones, lingers after class. Her voice is small when she says, "You ever get tired of fighting?" I smile, passing her a compass from the supply box. "I stopped fighting," I tell her. "I started teaching." She hesitates, then confesses that her ex-husband once tracked her car through a hidden GPS chip. I show her how to find it, how to remove it, how to make sure the signal never comes back. When she leaves the porch, she walks toward the shoreline without glancing behind her. I watch until the ocean swallows her silhouette. That's how I know she's healing. She doesn't need to look back anymore. The sky shifts into the color they call the blue hour, the moment between night and day, when everything feels both alive and weightless. The wind carries salt and laughter from the group still training below. For the first time, silence feels like company, not punishment. I touch the small scar under my collarbone, the faint reminder of where the bullet entered. The sun lifts over the horizon, and I open my journal, writing the only truth that still matters. At 2 a.m. that night, a bullet almost stopped my heart. Instead, it started it over. The waves rise and fall like steady breath. The porch groans, and I let the quiet surround me. Not the kind of silence Evan taught me, but the kind I chose for myself. Soft, free, and finally alive.